Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. We have so much to talk about today. As more and more people are shot and killed in the city of Milwaukee, voices are growing louder, demanding that something be done. We'll talk about the proposal to build a new arena downtown for the Milwaukee Bucks and whether that will ever get done. And we'll talk about Governor Scott Walker and how he's doing so far in the race to the White House. All right, let me introduce everybody. You know longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, and Gerard Randall, education and job creation consultant. And of course, Denise Callaway, now a communications and public relations professional. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about what has been a very violent spring in the city of Milwaukee. Last week, there were 7 homicides in one 48-hour period. So far this year, 43 homicides, more than 3 times the number from last year, same period. Do you blame the culture? Do you blame guns? Do you blame a lenient criminal justice system? Do you blame the mayor, the police chief? Or is it really something that's way beyond anybody's control?
Well, I think it's controllable. One of the more hopeful things that happened this week was the effort on the part of coordinated police force to address some of the gang violence or anticipate that some of the gang violence that could happen might be responsible by some of those that they'd already identified as gang members. I think that's an element of it. The mayor's call for addressing the availability of guns. I think people have now started to take a look at the role of the courts in allowing for those who have felony potential convictions to get those reduced to misdemeanors. I think some of those are appropriate. Some of those are certainly instances where if you've got a long track record of criminal behavior, then you can pretty much anticipate that somebody that's not going to follow the law, even if it means being a felon and having a gun in their possession and ignoring the laws that don't allow for that. The other is the role that families and neighbors play in a lot of this. The most disturbing thing about the whole situation involving the 2-year-old that was hit, Archie Brown Jr., was a friend of mine. And I just know that it was just a very, very painful experience for him to have hit the child with his vehicle and then to lose his life afterwards and all that was triggered after that. That's not something that could have been avoided because there were too many personal decisions that were made in that process. Here's one thing, though, that could have happened. And when he went on the run, there were people who knew who the killer was and where he was. And I think that in and of itself is something that more and more neighbors have to do. They have to be courageous in their neighborhoods and point out where potential violence is about to occur. You can see the gang element that's dealing drugs in neighborhoods. That has to be addressed. You can see those instances where young people are in need of greater guidance. Resources have to be put into that. So all of these things that I've just mentioned play some role in the violence that has erupted in our city, and I think that leadership is going to be the key to all of it. We need strong leadership to address that violence and tackle it head on, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the courts, or whether it's in the mayor's office.
Denise, a friend of mine said to me the other day, you know what? It's really not a problem for the metropolitan area. It's a problem for Milwaukee's inner city black population, period. It's not a problem for the rest of the area. True or not true?
Well, if it's a problem for one large segment of our city, it's a problem for the entire community, because we can't wall ourselves off from things that happen and that influence the way we all behave. I've talked to people from the North Shore, from Waukesha, and even from the south side of Milwaukee. One thing they have all said in common is what happened on Sunday shook them so much that if they were in an accident where, God forbid, they hit somebody, or even if they hit somebody's car, they're not going to get out of the car and stop. Right. They're going to call the police and say, this is what happened, and I'm headed to the closest police station. So, you know, we make a huge mistake if we say we insulate ourselves from these things that are happening because they're not happening in our back door. Because what we're doing is we're moving them closer and closer to happening in various parts of the community. But I think Gerard is right about something, though, and that is that this is a multi-layered, multifaceted program and a problem. And I wish there was one thing we could do, and we could say, that's it, that resolves it. But we can't do that. Right. There is one thing, though, that to me is at the heart of this, and that has been the inability of legislators statewide, locally, and at the national level to stop kneeling at the altar of the NRA and to make some tough decisions about handguns and what we need to do about handgun availability in this community. Gerard, I am so sorry for the loss of your friend. And I can't help but wonder if that gentleman did not have access to a handgun, if he had to go in and grab a shotgun out of somebody's house, if that would have been enough time for somebody to say, wait a minute, we see you bringing out this big shotgun, you need to stop and take a step back. We will continue to have this problem because handguns are so easily accessible in this community. I mean, I can't imagine the thought process that says, this horrible thing just happened, I'm going to go in and find a gun. And the guy's able to go into a house in the neighborhood, find a gun, come back out, and take the life of a man who was trying to do what he could to help this child who at 2 years old wasn't being watched carefully enough and ran out into the street. I think the thing that also shakes people is you can understand how this kind of quick accident can happen to anybody at all. You just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We are creating, because we will not be vigilant, we will not be strong, we will not stand up for our children when it comes to the availability and easy access to handguns. We are creating instances now where there are a lot of people who are going to be at the wrong place in the wrong time because we've got way too many guns out there in the hands of criminals who shouldn't have them, but they do. And I think the only way we can honestly begin to resolve this issue is to make some tough decisions about what we're going to do about people who have handguns. It is insane that in this state, as Chief Flynn said, if you're arrested for having marijuana for the second time, it's a felony. But if you're arrested for illegally carrying a concealed weapon for the second time, it's a misdemeanor. Something is wrong, and that is one of the issues that we have got to get to as we tackle this other stuff. Otherwise, you're just putting a Band-Aid on an open wound because these guns are still going to be available and people are still going to use them.
We have talked about violence in the city of Milwaukee at least 100 times. Will we be talking about it 100 more?
I think so, because the political system is not dealing with it and apparently cannot deal with it. And that, I agree with everything that's been said, and it is devastating to me. These two children that were killed this past weekend, there was a whole classroom of children who were killed at Sandy Hook at Christmas time. And that didn't make our political system do anything about it. And that is just appalling to me. It is appalling that those things can happen, and they happen again and again and again. And in this case, one child is killed accidentally. Another child then is killed because someone's upset about the killing of the child and then kills his other nephew. And that is just appalling. And Denise is absolutely right. The idea that, in a fit of anger, there are going to be people doing stupid things and irrational things. But if guns are not so handily available, and they are, and we not only that, but we have politicians standing up and insisting that they have to be, that we have to allow anyone to have a gun anywhere, and if we do anything to to control it, including taking it away from people who should never have them in the first place, that somehow violates the Constitution, which is not true. It is the biggest lie that has been told in this country, and it is a deadly lie, and it continues to kill people. And until we have to insist our politicians do something, and if you won't do anything, we have to get them out of there because they are irresponsible. They are totally. They shouldn't even be in public office if they're not going to act when these kinds of things happen.
All right, move on. Let's talk for a few minutes about the proposal to build a new $500 million arena for the Milwaukee Bucks. Do you think all the parties involved will ever come up with the money they say is needed to build this thing? How about Denise first?
I sure hope so, because we need to have the Bucks to be a major league town. I mean, I really think that we need to have that. It's one of the signs of a city that kind of has its act together and is able to get things done. And just as importantly, if we don't get it done, that certainly is something that people remember about Milwaukee and what we were or were not able to accomplish. it looks pretty too. I mean, it does. It looks like it could be a great, not only arena, but entertainment complex. I think we will get it done, but just as was the case with Miller Park, as was the case with what's now the BMO Harris Bradley Center, it is going to be painful for us to figure it out. And I think that what concerns me is we have politicians saying, oh, well, that's all you're going to put in. You have to put in more money. Yeah, we said we were going to put more in, but now it's on you to do it. I think we need to quit pointing fingers at each other. If we're serious about coming to a solution on this, sit down in a room. Maybe nobody gets to leave until you figure out the funding piece of it, and then let's move on to being able to enjoy this opportunity that presents itself. You know, I do love basketball, and it's so exciting for the Bucks to actually be in a position where they're in the playoffs. But, you know, the thing that's kind of in the back of the minds of a lot of basketball fans is, well, this is great, but, you know, what's going to happen 2 years from now? They'll do it. They'll be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. It'll get done, but it's going to be much more painful than it needs to be.
As Denise mentioned, a lot of outstate politicians are saying, you know, Milwaukee's got to come up with more cash. They got to get in the game more than they've been in the game so far. And the Milwaukee politicians are starting to say, you know, you can tell us we have to come up with more cash, but we don't have it, and we're not coming up with it.
Well, I believe they do have it, and that gets me back to the whole notion of accessing some of the funding from gaming. The Potawatomi were fortunate to not have to compete with a casino in Kenosha, and their contribution back to the city in some form should be an investment in the arena. Whether it's naming rights or whether it's giving the okay for the city and the county to allow for some of the proceeds that the Potawatomi give to those municipalities to be accessed. If the city gave up $1 million and the county gave up $1 million of the roughly $6 million a year that the two combined get over 30 years, that's $60 million. And that puts them where they need to be in terms of cash. The other, I look at, and I do believe Denise is right, it's going to get done. I'm looking at the leadership at the Bradley Center, which plans say that it has to be torn down. You've got Ted Kellner, Joe Sweeney, Mike Grebe that are there, and they're really big champions of the city. I think Kellner is actually in a unique position because he's chair of all of the major parties that are involved in this. And so you've got some unifying force that is going to make sure that the money is going to be there. It will be there. The other piece to this is when the Bucks allowed for a minority stake in the ownership of the team, I think they helped to build a lobbying force that we haven't seen before of people who have relationships with the legislature. They can go and make a case for why this ought to be built in Milwaukee because they're respected leaders in their own right. And then, of course, you've got the proposal to have ancillary economic development that will accompany this, which in the past people say, well, it didn't happen with the Bradley Center, it didn't happen with Miller Park. It most certainly did with Miller Park. All you have to do is go along 43rd Street south, and you can see all of that development that's sprung up since Miller Park was put up. And then you got a bona fide plan this time to go along with a new arena that didn't exist with the Bradley Center. It was just a pipe dream that there would be additional economic development, but nothing that was concrete. And this go-round, you've got people who are actually willing to say, we're going to put some private money into this to make it happen. It'll happen in stages, but it will happen. So I think that's where the big differences are, and it's more than just something that's hanging out there waiting to happen. I do believe that this is going to happen because of the players involved, because of the plan that they've already laid out for folks. That's actually pretty exciting. I hope that the team, although I don't see it moving too far in this round of playoffs, yeah. But I do see this advancing to the point where come the end of summer, it'll be a done deal.
When you saw the drawings of all the $500 million of ancillary development around the new arena, at first I thought, okay, as Gerard said, it didn't happen last time. Why would it happen this time? But then I thought, well, maybe these New York zillionaire developers know how to do things that Milwaukee doesn't know how to do.
I think if those 3 billionaires, 3 of the richest people on earth, want to build the whole arena, they could do that. If they wanted to build ancillary development, they could do that too. I kind of beg to differ, Gerard. I think those junk food places south of Miller Park is not exactly, great development. But I do think
what was there.
I do think it's going to happen. Because billionaires get what they want. Because a former legislative leader, a brother of a present legislative leader, is now lobbying for the bucks. I think it's going to happen. I'm offended that you have the state legislature, which has continued to cut state shared revenue to Milwaukee and all of its needs and its education and everything else, saying, come on, Milwaukee, put up some more money. I mean, that really offends me. But I think it is going to happen, and I think it should happen. I agree. I go to Bucks games, and I love them, but I have never been in favor of public money contributions going into it, particularly when you have 3 of the richest men on earth who are going to benefit and make big profit off of keeping that team here and improving that team. But it's going to happen because big money talks.
All right. Because it's at least a possibility that our governor may be the next president of the United States, let's talk about the race to the White House. Even though he hasn't declared yet, how do you think Scott Walker's doing so far? And if he did come out on top on the Republican side, could he beat Hillary Clinton if she was the Democratic nominee?
I was hoping you were going to go to Joel first.
So was Joel.
And then I figured I wouldn't have any time if he did. So,
how's he doing so far?
I think that this recent Marquette poll that came out is a reflection of the budget that he put out for the state, and people particularly disagreeing with some of those budget priorities around education, whether it was K-12 or higher ed, which the legislature is going to fix. On a national level, being close to where some of the insiders are thinking about this, he's golden. I mean, I'm surprised. I think he's surprised. I think those around him are surprised that he's gotten the kind of traction that he's gotten. But it's a long way off between now and when primary season begins in January. I'm surprised, first off, that the kickoff has happened so soon on both sides of the aisle with regards to making announcements and getting campaign staffs together, the fundraising that has to take place. It's mind-numbing. And I also think that it's an indication of just how brutal this whole process is going to be, not just for the candidates, but for the average voter. Because where do you decipher the lies from the rest of the stuff that campaigns produce, that their allies produce? And it just means now that come this August, you're going to see stuff flying about that you'll have a difficult time discerning what's the truth and what's not, what's manufactured. Right now, they're focusing on the petty stuff. On the Republican side, you've got 4 announced candidates with more to jump into the race. That's certainly going to make for some interesting insider politics on the Republican side. I know that people who will be going to the convention next year are already starting to weigh in as to where they think they may line up. And that's the earliest that I've ever seen this type of activity take place.
If it came down to Hillary versus Walker, could he beat Hillary?
I don't think it will come down to Scott Walker by any means, but I understand why he's doing well and better than most of us expected, which is that he is a fresh face. He is, and it's an innocuous face. You know, there are people who are have just as ugly a political philosophy as he does, like Ted Cruz, who also everyone recognizes as an ugly, mean-spirited person. And Scott Walker puts this mild-mannered, pleasant face on it all, and that's helped him in this state, and I think it helps him nationally. It also was very, very clear that what Gerard said, he didn't expect to do this well this soon, and when he got in some of those national spotlights, he kind of embarrassed himself. He didn't have answers to things. He tried to not answer questions, and he can't do that for very long. But here's why I think it isn't going to be him. Once you get past the superficial, pleasant face, his philosophy is just as ugly as the ugliest. Now that can help him in Republican primaries, but when the national press concentrates on, look, Wisconsin has one of the worst job creation records in the country. Is this really, the model that you want to use for at a time when people are desperate for employment in this country? And all these Republican, philosophies that take money out of the pockets of people. The reason why, the jobs are so bad is that, Act 10 took a lot of money away from a lot of working people, and they don't have money to spend, and that's why the economy in Wisconsin is bad. And you don't want that for the nation.
The tax cuts.
Yeah. And the tax cuts go overwhelmingly to the wealthy, and people think, wow, I got a tax cut. It was $116. And they think somehow he's done something for them. But you can't keep passing over that. Abraham Lincoln said you can fool, some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
But the reality is, though, Act 10 got him where he is today, and Wisconsin voters supported him not once, not twice, 3 times.
Yeah,
now they don't.
But now they don't. And I think there are a couple interesting things in that Marquette poll. The first is every single major piece of legislation that the governor has touted as part of his proposed budget, right to work, taking a look at what we're going to do around the Natural Resources Board, cuts to K-12 education, cuts to the UW system. Those were all things that people overwhelmingly opposed, which is probably why he got a 41% rating, the lowest he's had in the past 3 years in the Marquette poll, and why the Marquette poll also showed that in his own state he couldn't beat Hillary Clinton. People are beginning to see what people in Milwaukee County knew, and that is that there's a lot of bait and switch that goes on, and at least when it comes to budget time with Mr. Walker. The other thing that I'd just like to remind people is when you take a look at the fact that he's a front runner, in some polls you've got 4 people who are front runners bunched up together, separated by fewer than 4 or 5 points. I don't really call that somebody who's a front runner. That means you're at the top of a list that's got 18 other people on it, and you just happen to be at the top. And lest we think that we can predict what happens in the general election, or quite frankly, even when it comes to time for the Republicans to nominate someone, that if we think right now tells us anything, I think we should all make sure that we write a nice letter to President Michelle Bachmann, because at this point in time, a few years ago, she was right where Scott Walker is right now.
All right. There's been plenty of conversation lately about the way the police do their jobs in Milwaukee and elsewhere, and plenty of allegations of police misconduct. The difference this time, it's not just angry words, but disturbing pictures. Rick Horowitz has been thinking about one of the technology's unexpected consequences. Rick.
Remember when police surveillance state meant a society with cameras everywhere and the police watching everyone? What if the new police surveillance state is a society with cameras everywhere and everyone watching the police? Welcome to the age of the instant upload. And let's talk about the tragic killing of Walter Scott. That's the one in North Charleston, South Carolina, that started with a traffic stop for a broken taillight and ended with a man dead of multiple gunshot wounds to the back from a policeman's gun. A policeman who initially claimed that Mr. Scott had taken the officer's taser, that he, the officer, had feared for his life and fired in self-defense. Then the video came out, and it told a very different story. The man hadn't taken the taser. The officer wasn't being threatened when he fired 8 times at a man running away from him. And the video even showed the officer tampering with the crime scene, leaving the crumpled, handcuffed Mr. Scott, hustling back to where he'd been standing when he fired the fatal shots, picking something off the ground, maybe the taser, and then walking back and dropping it right next to the body. So glad, wrote the journalist Rafael Olmeida, so glad the only time a cop lied about the circumstances of the shooting of an unarmed black man, someone caught it on video. He was kidding, you know, unless you actually believe that this shooting and the original false account from the officer was the very first time any cop has ever gunned down a black man who posed no threat to him and then concocted an alibi. Now, a much more plausible explanation is that this sort of thing has been going on pretty much forever, and not just in North Charleston, a fatal gunshot in Tulsa, a fatal chokehold on Staten Island, and on and on. Some bad or scared or incompetent cops getting away with murder. Except that now there's video, smartphones, and dash cams, and even body cams. And yes, sometimes cameras can lie, though not as easily as humans can. And sometimes the authorities, prosecutors, even juries can choose not to see what's right in front of them. But video will make that harder, because now we can see for ourselves. The whole world can see.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for joining us. We will be off the next 2 weeks because we're being displaced by the Channel 10 auction, so we'll see you after that. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.